She spends 3 years writing the first chapter of the same book. He has been studying digital marketing for 2 years but never launches his first product. She rewrites her resume dozens of times but never applies for her dream job. On the outside, they seem like dedicated, meticulous people committed to excellence. On the inside, they live in silent agony that few can name. This is the reality of millions of people trapped in an invisible trap. Brilliant, talented individuals, full of transformative ideas, who live eternally in the limbo of almost ready. They spend months, sometimes years, polishing details of projects that never see the light of day. They refine plans that are never executed. They accumulate knowledge that is never applied. There is a type of modern suffering that does not appear in psychology manuals, but corrodes the soul of those who carry unrealized potential. It is the pain of constantly living one step behind one's own life. The torture of feeling that there is something great inside you but never being able to get it out. Not because of laziness, not because of lack of ability, but because of something much more subtle and devastating. Society applauds these people. What dedication, they say. What commitment to quality. And they smile, accept the compliments, but inside they carry a burning truth. They know they are not dedicating themselves. They are hiding. They know they are not seeking excellence. They are running away from something. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who revolutionized our understanding of the human mind, identified one of the cruelest mechanisms of the modern psyche. He discovered that when the pursuit of perfection becomes obsessive, it ceases to be about quality and becomes about fear. A fear so primitive and terrifying that the mind creates sophisticated strategies to avoid it. Because there is something scarier than failing. It is discovering that we could have flown much higher, much earlier. It is facing the burning question inside. If I am capable of all this, why did I waste so much time hiding? It is confronting the possibility that our greatest enemy was not a lack of preparation, but an excess of it. Jung knew that behind the mask of the perfectionist there is not only a demanding standard, but a soul grounded in its own power. And this revelation changes everything. Because when we understand that our paralysis is not about quality, but about the terror of our own greatness, we discover that the key to freedom has always been in our hands. The question is, do we have enough courage to use that key? To understand the real nature of perfectionism, Jung invites us to look beyond the shiny surface. Because those who call themselves perfectionists are rarely seeking excellence. They are building a sophisticated psychological fortress against their own deepest fears. Imagine someone who has been dreaming of changing careers for 3 years. All this time, this person has been studying obsessively, planning meticulously, researching exhaustively. They take expensive online courses, read dozens of specialized books, and talk to successful professionals in the field. They create detailed spreadsheets with complex timelines, devise meticulous strategies with alternative scenarios, and draw up business plans that rival corporate documents. They attend weekly webinars, actively participate in LinkedIn groups, and network obsessively at virtual and in-person events. She collects certifications, accumulates technical knowledge, and masters specialized software. From the outside, she seems extremely prepared, responsible, cautious, and admirable in her dedication. Colleagues praise her discipline. Family members admire her commitment. She herself feels proud of her seriousness. But Jung would see something completely different behind this impeccable facade. He would see someone who has found the most elegant, socially acceptable, and psychologically comfortable way to never leave the spot. He would see a soul trapped in its own apparent excellence. The persona, that social mask we meticulously construct for the world, is never more brilliant and convincing than when it hides our greatest existential fears. The perfectionist develops an absolutely impeccable persona. Disciplined like a monk, meticulous like a scientist, committed to quality like a medieval craftsman. And this mask is so convincing, so well constructed, so socially valued that even he himself believes in it completely. "I'm just preparing myself better," he repeats to himself like a sacred mantra. "When I'm really ready, I'll act with confidence. I need to study a little more to be sure. It's not the ideal moment yet, but it will be soon. Just one more course, one more certification. I need to completely master this area before taking the first real step." But Jung, with his penetrating insight into the human psyche, discovered something deeply disturbing in this seemingly virtuous dynamic. Endless preparation is not genuinely about being ready for action. It's about creating an elegant psychological barrier so we never have to prove concretely what we are capable of. Because while we are eternally preparing, we can still comfortably feed the grandiose fantasy that we are latent geniuses. We can live indefinitely in the psychologically safe territory of untested potential, where all possibilities remain romantically intact and no concrete disappointment is possible. The perfectionist lives in a state that Jung would call elegant paralysis, a fascinating psychological condition where the person is not technically stuck, but is also not genuinely moving forward. They are constantly busy in a productive way, improving insignificant details, adjusting already excellent plans, absorbing unnecessary additional knowledge. They review the same professional project dozens of times in search of unattainable perfection. They rewrite the same text endlessly, never satisfied with versions that were already exceptional. They systematically postpone launches until absolutely everything is perfect. They redo presentations that would already impress any audience. They obsessively seek yet another expert opinion, yet another technical review, yet another unnecessary adjustment. There is constant and visible movement, but no real progress. There is intense and dedicated action, but no genuine risk. And most importantly, there is the psychologically comforting illusion of significant progress without the terrifying vulnerability of real public exposure. This mask of perfection serves a deeply defensive psychological purpose. It protects the vulnerable ego from two absolutely terrifying existential truths. The first truth, that we can fail spectacularly, publicly, humiliatingly, and irreversibly, destroying our self-esteem and social reputation. The second truth, even more frightening to the psyche, that we can succeed extraordinarily beyond our wildest expectations, forcing us to consistently live up to that intimidating greatness for the rest of our lives, carrying the crushing weight of the high expectations of everyone around us. And both of these extreme possibilities require something that the perfectionist is not psychologically prepared to offer: the raw courage to show oneself as imperfect, vulnerable, fallible, and deeply human before the observing and judging world. They require the bravery to accept that we are limited beings trying to do our best with finite resources, scarce time, and incomplete knowledge. Jung observed with clinical precision that the human mind cannot tolerate energy voids. When we do not act concretely in the real world, all the psychic energy that should naturally be used to create, accomplish, and transform external reality turns destructively inward, where it becomes psychologically toxic and paralyzing. And that is precisely where the chronic anxiety characteristic of the perfectionist is born. The relentless self-criticism that never rests, the constant and distressing feeling of being tragically behind in one's own life. Sleepless nights spent obsessively thinking about details that could be marginally improved. Entire days wasted refining something that was already objectively good enough by any reasonable standard. The mask of perfection then becomes much more than a behavioral strategy. It becomes a core identity, a fundamental pillar of self-esteem, a primary source of self-worth. I am fundamentally someone who accepts nothing less than the best, thinks the perfectionist with unconscious pride. I have naturally high standards that set me apart. I'm not like those ordinary people who do anything in a mediocre way. And in this seemingly noble and self-determined statement, Jung would clearly hear the desperate and silent cry of someone who is so paralyzed by fear of disappointing themselves and others that they consciously prefer never to really try, never to genuinely expose themselves, never to take any real risks. There is a fear that modern psychology rarely names, but which Jung identified as one of the most devastating to the human soul: the terror of discovering our own greatness. It sounds contradictory, almost absurd. After all, who would be afraid of being powerful, talented, capable of transforming their reality? But Jung knew that this fear not only exists, but is one of the most paralyzing forces that inhabit the human unconscious. When we observe someone who spends years preparing without ever taking action, we are not just seeing procrastination or indecision. We are witnessing a silent psychological battle between two equally terrifying forces: the fear of failure and the fear of success. And of these two, Jung discovered that the second is often the most powerful and the least understood. The fear of failure is obvious, tangible, concrete. We can easily imagine its devastating consequences: painful public humiliation, significant financial loss, relentless social judgment, irreversibly shattered self-esteem. It is a fear that makes logical sense, that we can clearly rationalize and deal with in a relatively practical way. We can create strategies to minimize risks, develop elaborate contingency plans, seek emotional and financial insurance to protect us from the most brutal consequences. But the fear of success operates at much deeper, more subtle and disturbing layers of the human psyche. It is a terror that lurks in the shadows of the unconscious, whispering existential doubts that the conscious mind can rarely articulate clearly. It is a psychological force that manifests itself in seemingly contradictory symptoms: procrastination that looks like laziness but is actually paralysis, the never-ending quest for perfection, the endless preparation that never results in action. Because true, transformative success is not just about achieving a specific goal. It is about suddenly discovering that we are capable of much more than we ever imagined possible. It is about confronting the disturbing reality that we could have acted years ago, that we wasted precious time cowardly hiding behind sophisticated and socially accepted excuses. It is accepting the painful truth that our smallness was fundamentally a conscious choice, not a limitation imposed by hostile external circumstances. And this revelation can be psychologically devastating to an identity carefully constructed on comforting narratives of external limitation. Jung observed with clinical precision that many people live comfortably in the comforting illusion that they are limited primarily by adverse and uncontrollable external circumstances. If I had more money available, if I had been born into another more privileged family, if I had had other better educational opportunities, if the economic climate were more favorable. These self-sabotaging narratives offer significant psychological relief because they conveniently place ultimate responsibility outside our sphere of direct personal control. But when we finally act with authentic courage and discover that we are surprisingly capable of overcoming obstacles that seem completely insurmountable, this entire defensive structure, carefully constructed over years, collapses dramatically. Success forces a brutally honest and painful reassessment of our entire previous personal history. It compels us to ask without mercy or self-pity, if I could do this now, why the hell didn't I do it before? If I had this extraordinary potential sleeping within me all along, how many other valuable opportunities did I cowardly miss out on because of irrational and unfounded fear? If I am genuinely capable of creating meaningful works, of leading with natural authority, of transforming concrete realities, what overwhelming responsibility does that bring to the rest of my earthly existence? There is also the suffocating and relentless social weight that inevitably accompanies visible and public success. Jung knew that modern society maintains a deeply ambivalent and contradictory relationship with those who dare to stand out significantly from the crowd. Publicly, we celebrate success with performative enthusiasm and appropriate social rituals. Privately, we often secretly envy it, maliciously criticize it behind the scenes, defensively diminish it to protect our own fragile self-esteem. Those who dare to shine brightly inevitably become the target of constant and exhausting expectations, of merciless critical glances, of people who secretly hope they will fail spectacularly so they can feel better about their own self-imposed and carefully unaddressed limitations. The perfectionist intuits this social dynamic viscerally, almost intuitively, through a keen sensitivity to human relational patterns. They instinctively know that once they definitively leave the comfortable preparation zone and enter the real and unforgiving arena of competitive life, there will be no more safe and protective anonymity. There will no longer be the comfortable psychological protection of social mediocrity, which is socially accepted and even celebrated in certain circles. They will be constantly observed, rigorously judged by high standards, and relentlessly held accountable for consistent results. Even worse, they will be forced to continue producing consistently and sustainably, to maintain high standards indefinitely, to perpetually live up to their publicly revealed potential. There is yet another aspect that Jung explored with particular psychoanalytic depth: the visceral and primitive fear of facing one's own shadow through socially recognized and achieved success. Because when we achieve something truly meaningful and transformative, we are inevitably forced to integrate aspects of ourselves that we have carefully repressed and banished from consciousness for decades. The emerging leader must courageously accept their natural power and all the responsibility that comes with it. The authentic creator must fully embrace their disturbing and potentially disruptive uniqueness. The true innovator must fully assume their destabilizing and iconoclastic boldness. And often these aspects have been systematically banished from consciousness during our upbringing because they were considered psychologically dangerous to family stability or socially inappropriate for group harmony. If you are feeling a growing and unsettling discomfort as you recognize these complex patterns operating silently within yourself, know that you are on the right path to real psychological transformation. Genuine and authentic discomfort is always the first unmistakable sign that something deep and fundamental is being touched, something that deserves and demands your full and courageous attention. Jung discovered that there is a particular and paradoxical cruelty in this psychological dynamic. The greater a person's natural potential, the greater their paralyzing fear of fully realizing it tends to be. It is as if the psyche were evolutionarily programmed to defensively protect us from our own latent and potentially transformative magnificence. The life of the perfectionist is a silent tragedy that unfolds in daily acts of self-sabotage disguised as virtue. Outwardly, everything seems fine. There is apparent discipline, visible effort, a constant pursuit of excellence that impresses casual observers. But internally, a slow and systematic erosion of the soul takes place, day after day, choice after choice postponed, dream after dream carefully shelved with seemingly solid rational justifications. Jung observed that all psychic energy not adequately expressed in the real world inevitably turns into something destructive within the person. It is like a mighty river artificially dammed. The water does not magically disappear. It just changes course violently and often causes devastating floods in completely unexpected and unpredictable places. The perfectionist experiences this internal flooding constantly, but rarely consciously connects their inexplicable chronic anxiety, their irritability without apparent cause, or their persistent sense of existential emptiness with their systematic choices not to act when they should. The first concrete manifestation of this devastating psychological cost is anxiety that never truly rests. The perfectionist carries a constant, palpable tension in their body and mind, as if they were perpetually on the eve of something monumentally important that never actually arrives. There is always a crucial project to finish, a significant detail to meticulously adjust, a fundamental skill to fully develop. But this chronic tension is not genuinely productive. It is deeply corrosive to the nervous system. It burns precious vital energy without generating real movement or tangible progress, like a sophisticated engine revving intensely in neutral. Jung identified that this specific anxiety has a distinctly different quality from the common anxiety we all experience occasionally. It is the anxiety characteristic of someone who knows on some deep unconscious level that they are systematically betraying themselves. It is the visceral and undeniable discomfort of a soul that intuitively realizes it is being criminally wasted, even as the conscious mind defensively insists that everything is under absolute control. The physical body does not lie or deceive itself. It faithfully records every precious opportunity lost, every creative impulse deliberately stifled, every moment of natural courage aborted by fear. There is also the phenomenon that Jung would precisely call chronic existential hunger. The perfectionist is always voraciously seeking more technical information, more meticulous preparation, more emotional security, but never feels genuinely satisfied or complete. It's like trying to quench your thirst by drinking only salt water. The more you consume desperately, the more intense your thirst becomes. Because what the soul really craves at its core is not more theoretical knowledge. It is authentic expression in the world. It is not more endless preparation. It is courageous and concrete action. It is not more guaranteed security. It is life lived fully with all the inherent risks. Relentless and destructive self-criticism is another devastating psychological price that perfectionists pay daily. They gradually develop a tyrannical and tireless inner voice that is never satisfied with anything, that always finds microscopic flaws in any achievement, that always demands more without ever acknowledging what has already been accomplished. This inner voice is neither motivational nor constructive. It is fundamentally destructive to self-esteem. It does not genuinely inspire excellence. It completely paralyzes with crippling fear of judgment. Jung would see this fierce self-criticism as a perverse and sophisticated form of self-punishment. The person brutally punishes themselves for not acting, but the psychological punishment itself becomes a new compelling reason to never act. There is a particular and profound loneliness in the everyday experience of the perfectionist, because they cannot share their true inner struggle without completely destroying their persona carefully constructed over years. They cannot honestly admit that they are completely paralyzed by fear without revealing that their celebrated pursuit of excellence is fundamentally an elaborate facade. So they carry their emotional weight alone, hermetically sealed in their own self-imposed golden prison, ironically surrounded by people who admire them for qualities they know to be essentially defensive and inauthentic. Personal relationships also pay a high and often irreversible price. The perfectionist systematically projects his own impossible expectations onto others, creating a suffocating atmosphere of constant tension around him. Romantic partners, close friends, and professional colleagues constantly feel the crushing pressure to live up to completely unattainable standards. Even more painful, the perfectionist often misses precious opportunities for real human connection because they are always almost ready to open up emotionally, almost ready to be genuinely vulnerable, almost ready to let someone see them as they really are, without masks. Jung observed that there is a particularly cruel phenomenon in the life of the perfectionist, the systematic temporal reversal of natural satisfaction. While psychologically healthy people find genuine joy in the process and the journey itself, perfectionists obsessively postpone all satisfaction to a hypothetical future when everything will finally be perfect. But that promised future never actually arrives because perfection is by mathematical definition unattainable. Thus, they live perpetually in a present that is constantly sacrificed in the name of a future that simply does not exist. Natural creativity is one of the biggest victims of this destructive psychological dynamic. Jung knew that genuine creativity fundamentally requires the courage to produce visibly imperfect things, to experiment boldly without guarantees of success, to fail publicly, and to learn from it. But perfectionists cannot tolerate even for a moment the natural discomfort of creative imperfection. So their most brilliant and original ideas die prematurely in endless drafts, in projects eternally in development, in inspirations that never see the light of day. There is also the deeper and perhaps more tragic existential cost, the growing sense of living a life that is not genuinely your own. Jung spoke extensively about the fundamental importance of individuation, the courageous process of becoming authentically who we really are. But the perfectionist, by repeatedly choosing the safety of inaction over the vulnerability of authentic expression, progressively distances themselves from their true essence. There is a moment in every perfectionist's life when the pain of remaining small becomes greater than the fear of becoming great. It is a quiet, almost imperceptible moment, but one that marks an internal revolution. It is not a dramatic decision made on a Sunday morning. It is a weariness that accumulates slowly, like sediment at the bottom of a lake, until the water becomes too murky to bear. Jung knew that real transformation never happens through brilliant intellectual insights or spectacular mystical revelations. It happens when the soul simply can no longer sustain the lie it has been telling itself. When the perfectionist finally admits that their pursuit of excellence has become an escape from life, something fundamental changes in the architecture of their personality. The first step in this transformation is neither heroic nor inspiring. It is deeply humiliating. It is recognizing that years have been wasted in an elaborate game of hide and seek with oneself. It is accepting that while other imperfect people were creating, failing, learning, and growing, the perfectionist remained in the same place, polishing the same stone endlessly. But Jung discovered something extraordinary about this moment of humiliation. It contains the seeds of freedom. Because when we finally stop pretending that we are different, when we admit that we are as scared and vulnerable as any other human being, something relaxes deeply within us. The mask can finally fall, and with it, the crushing weight of having to be perfect. The courage of imperfection is not about accepting mediocrity. It is about accepting humanity. It is understanding that every genuine creative act is born from a willingness to show oneself as incomplete, in process vulnerable. It is understanding that perfection is not the opposite of imperfection. It is the opposite of life. When someone finally acts from this place of acceptance, something magical happens. The energy that was trapped in cycles of endless preparation is released like a dam breaking. Shelved projects resurface. Long-forgotten ideas take on new life. Postponed conversations finally happen. Not because the person has become perfect, but because they have stopped demanding perfection from themselves. Jung observed that there is a fundamental difference between action born of fear and action born of acceptance. The former is tense, controlling, obsessed with results. The latter is fluid, experimental, curious about the process. The perfectionist who frees themselves does not stop caring about quality. They stop caring about others' opinions of their quality. There is something deeply rebellious about the decision to act imperfectly in a world that demands perfection. It is an act of resistance against a culture that profits from our insecurity, that sells us the lie that we need to be ready before we begin. It is a silent declaration that we are worthy of expressing our imperfect humanity. The transformation of the perfectionist is not a single event, but a continuous process of small daily acts of courage. It is sending the email without proofreading it for the 10th time. It is publishing the text knowing it could be better. It is having the difficult conversation without having all the right words. It is choosing real life over the perfect imaginary life. Jung understood that individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are, necessarily requires the integration of the shadow. For the perfectionist, this means embracing not only their flaws but also their repressed greatness. It means accepting that they can be extraordinary and imperfect at the same time, that they can create magnificent things without being a magnificent person all the time. There is a profound irony in this journey. The more the perfectionist accepts their imperfection, the more genuinely excellent they become. Not the artificial, tense excellence of performance, but the organic excellence of someone who is fully present in their own life. It is the difference between a cut diamond and a rough gemstone. Both are valuable, but only one pulsates with life of its own. The world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs people brave enough to show their full humanity. It needs creators willing to fail publicly in order to learn privately. It needs leaders who admit when they don't know, artists who share unfinished work, human beings who choose vulnerability over invulnerability. When Jung looked at the human condition, he saw that our greatest suffering does not come from being imperfect. It comes from pretending we are not. The perfectionist who frees themselves discovers that their imperfection is not a flaw to be hidden, but a door to be walked through. In the end, the choice is simple, though not easy. We can spend our entire lives preparing to live, or we can start living while we prepare. We can remain safe in our gilded prison, or we can choose the frightening freedom of the arena. We can continue to pretend that we are different from all other imperfect humans, or we can accept our place in this extraordinary community of incomplete beings trying to make sense of existence. The burning question is not whether we are good enough. The question is whether we are brave enough to discover who we really are when we stop trying to be who we think we should be. Because in the end, the perfection we sought was right where we were always afraid to look, in our imperfect and irredeemably beautiful humanity. What is the project, dream, or idea that you have been putting off until you're ready? Write it in the comments. If you've made it this far, you've already taken a step beyond most people. You watch the videos. You reflect on each idea. Now the question is, how far do you want to go with this? If you want to take the next step and truly apply this knowledge to your life, the codes of the White Rabbit are ready for you. The link is in the pinned comment. Remember, success is a decision. The choice is yours. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit.